What if the birthday everyone just watched was built around the wrong number? Meghan Markle just marked her 45th birthday, and 45 is the number pushed through the familiar official narrative, repeated by the press, accepted almost automatically, and treated like settled fact. But now, an old magazine page, family recollections, conflicting timelines, and allegations associated with Tom Bower and Samantha Markle are being dragged back under the spotlight, creating a controversy that refuses to die. The claim is explosive, but it remains a claim. Critics believe there could be a 6-year discrepancy buried somewhere inside the story, and if that suspicion were ever supported by reliable records, the questions would suddenly become much bigger than candles on a birthday cake. They would reach into biographies, relationships, documents, and the carefully constructed public timeline surrounding one of the most scrutinized women on earth. And that is exactly why this forgotten detail has become so combustible.
There are so many telltale signs that something is clearly wrong with Meghan. And I don't mean it in a bad way, but I mean, how can you get your age so wrong?
That would make her birth year at around 1976. However, why is it saying here she was born 5 years later in 1981?
They contribute her as Meghan Markle, age 21, in Los Angeles, in California.
How can you make a mistake about your age? How can you make a mistake about the age difference between yourself and your elder half-sister?
So it makes sense. Oh my God, I've got to keep everybody away because if they start talking, the lies come out.
Classic.
But there are so many of them.
These sort of people cannot stand that they can be judged objectively with the facts and the truth, and not, as one says, Meghan's truth, which is very far from what we would call the truth, the objective facts.
The first clue being waved around is almost ridiculously ordinary. A magazine. Not a mysterious anonymous post, not a blurry screenshot supposedly leaked from some secret archive, but a March 1997 issue of 17 magazine, page 90, containing a lifestyle feature involving young women from Los Angeles. And sitting there is the name Meghan Markle, with an age printed beside it, 21. That single number has become gasoline for the entire theory because the officially reported birthday is August 4th, 1981. Do the arithmetic, and March 1997 would make her 15, not 21. 6 years. That is the gap critics cannot stop staring at. Of course, magazines make mistakes. Ages get typed incorrectly, editors misread notes, and innocent errors survive into print every day. But skeptics immediately point toward everything else on the page apparently lining up. The location, photograph, and identity. Their argument is brutally simple. Why does the age appear to be the detail that refuses to cooperate?
So, first and foremost, where this kind of rumor has come from, where apparently, allegedly, Megsy's lying about her age and she's older than what she actually claims to be, is, it seems from this.
And that is where curiosity turns into obsession, because the disputed page was physically published and distributed. Critics argue that this makes it more interesting than a modern digital image that could theoretically be manipulated, although publication itself certainly does not prove the age printed there was accurate. Still, in the world of internet investigation, that distinction matters enormously. A forgotten line sitting quietly in an old magazine suddenly becomes the kind of tiny detail people treat like an explosive clue, because once an official timeline is questioned, every old record starts looking different. Every date becomes suspicious. Every unexplained inconsistency becomes another thread begging to be pulled.
This is a copy of 17 magazine, and it was published in March of 1997. In it, it mentions our Megsy is from Los Angeles and that she was 21 years old at the time of publication. That would make her birth year at around 1976. However, why is it saying here she was born 5 years later in 1981?
Then Tom Bower enters the story, and suddenly the controversy expands beyond one magazine entry. His interest, according to the transcript, was not simply one disputed birthday, but the wider timeline. The source describes another alleged discrepancy involving an IMDb profile that supposedly once carried 1977 before later showing a different year. The transcript says screenshots exist, but that allegation by itself does not establish established that an older IMDb entry was accurate. Online databases can contain errors and can be edited. Yet to people already suspicious because of that magazine page, another appearance of 1977 feels less like random noise and more like a pattern. That is the psychological trapdoor underneath this entire controversy. Once two details appear to point in the same direction, people begin hunting for a third. And apparently, that hunt moved straight toward Northwestern University. The official timeline has her graduating in 2003, but investigators described in the source began examining classmates, alumni information, and photographs, including a salsa club photograph. The argument presented is that several people around her were reportedly born in the early 1970s, and an anonymous former classmate was reported as saying that people believed she was older than publicly claimed. But classmates being older does not prove somebody else's birth year, and an anonymous recollection cannot settle a factual question this serious. Still, inside the gossip storm, restraint disappears quickly. Suddenly, an older social circle becomes evidence. A photograph becomes evidence. Somebody's memory becomes evidence. And every coincidence starts being lined up like pieces of a puzzle nobody has conclusively completed. Then comes Thomas Markle, and this is where the transcript turns an apparently simple family question into another source of suspicion. During an account of a conversation, he reportedly did not immediately provide the year and instead suggested checking records. Critics seized on the hesitation instantly. Why hesitate over something that should be unforgettable? Why point toward paperwork rather than simply answer? Yet hesitation is not proof of deception, and this is precisely where speculation begins racing far ahead of evidence. Nevertheless, the moment became another piece of internet folklore. Because people were no longer examining one questionable date, they were examining every strange pause, every conflicting recollection, every sentence that sounded slightly less definitive than expected. And then the timeline jumps backward again toward stories that had already become part of her public biography. There is the famous Procter & Gamble story, repeatedly associated with her childhood activism, and questions in the transcript about whether every detail of that story can be independently verified. Then comes another seemingly harmless memory involving employment at Humphrey Yogurt, followed by the Yasmin Bleeth anecdote. According to the transcript's argument, the timing of a soft and Dree advertising association allegedly creates another chronological problem. Once again, this does not establish a different birth year, but to critics, it becomes another maddening coincidence, another childhood story, another date, another reason to open the calculator. And this is where Samantha Markle becomes impossible to separate from the controversy. For years, family claims were dismissed by many observers as bitterness, resentment, or private conflict spilling into public view. Yet the transcript argues that certain recollections now deserve renewed attention. Samantha Markle was born in November 1964, while the official August 1981 date creates roughly a 17-year difference. Family memories described in the source are then presented as suggesting a relationship that felt closer than that gap might imply. Although childhood memories alone obviously cannot establish a birth certificate date. Then the story reaches a 2018 briefing email involving Jason North and Finding Freedom, later disclosed through legal proceedings, in which ages attributed to family members became another mathematical battleground. Critics took those numbers, compared them with the known family timeline, and once again arrived near 1977. That does not make 1977 proven. It makes the contradiction the centerpiece of the mystery, and that distinction matters because this entire controversy survives inside the gap between what can be demonstrated and what people believe the clues suggest. One magazine entry could be wrong, one database could be wrong, one memory could be wrong, one calculation based on an email could be misunderstood. But when people stack all of them together, the picture suddenly looks darker, stranger, and much harder to dismiss with a shrug. And the most unsettling part is that the source has not even reached the documents critics consider the biggest twist yet. And then the mystery takes another turn, because the next trail runs straight through Joshua Silverstein. In a 2013 interview with Larry King, Meghan described a childhood first kiss at summer camp in Los Angeles when she was 13, and Joshua Silverstein later confirmed that they met at theater camp around 1993 or 1994. On the surface, nothing seems explosive about that, but investigators started comparing online birth year listings, and suddenly another disputed date appeared. IMDb reportedly lists Joshua Silverstein as born in 1980, a date that fits comfortably with the official timeline, while other celebrity biography websites have listed 1977. Conspiracy theorists then pushed the claim that online information had been changed after people began connecting dates. Nobody cited in the transcript conclusively proves which competing listing is correct, and that matters enormously. But inside a controversy, already overflowing with disputed numbers, even uncertainty becomes fuel. One date supports the familiar story. Another appears to support the alternative timeline. And once people begin seeing 1977 repeatedly, every coincidence starts looking suspicious. Then the story moves from childhood memories and online biographies into something far more sensitive, official royal paperwork. When Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor was born in May 2019, the birth certificate initially contained the mother's name, Rachel Meghan Markle. Weeks later, according to the transcript, that document was amended so that the first and middle names disappeared and the royal styling appeared instead. The stated explanation referenced consistency, but critics immediately began asking why such a change was necessary. Tom Bauer's theory, as presented in the source, goes further, suggesting that removing a legal name could make comparisons across different records more difficult. That remains an interpretation rather than an established reason for the amendment, but for people already hunting through school records, marriage documents, and historical paperwork, the change looked irresistible. A name connects documents. Remove that exact name, critics argue, and following the paper trail becomes more complicated. Not impossible, just harder. And this is where speculation becomes truly explosive, because critics then ask why anyone would want that trail complicated at all. The theory offered is painfully familiar to Hollywood. Age can affect casting opportunities. Meghan spent years pursuing acting work before Suits arrived in 2011, and the argument circulating around this controversy is that reducing an actress's apparent age could theoretically make certain roles easier to pursue. That idea is not proof that anything happened here, but skeptics say it provides the motive they believe the earlier clues were missing. Suddenly, the magazine entry, disputed database information, and conflicting recollections are no longer being treated as isolated oddities. They are being assembled into a theory about professional advantage. But then the allegations leap from Hollywood gossip into territory where the transcript itself acknowledges they have not been tested. The online commentators argue that if false biographical information had ever appeared on official marriage documentation, legal questions could potentially follow. From there, theories spiral toward the marriage, children's titles, and even succession. Those dramatic consequences remain hypothetical, and the transcript explicitly notes that these arguments have not been tested beyond online discussion. Yet that limitation has done almost nothing to slow the speculation. Then comes money. Netflix, Spotify, and other major partnerships enter the conversation because commentators speculate about whether inaccurate biographical representations could affect contracts. Again, the source does not establish that any agreement contained false information or that any company has challenged a contract on this basis. But once enormous reported deal values become attached to the theory, a disputed birth year suddenly sounds less like celebrity trivia and more like a potentially enormous controversy. And finally comes the detail that keeps critics talking: silence. The transcript argues that one definitive document could seemingly crush the speculation, while the people closest to the family should know the answer without hesitation. Thomas Markle, Samantha, Thomas Jr. The source portrays the unanswered question itself as suspicious, but silence cannot establish a different birthday, just as an old magazine typo cannot establish one by itself. That is exactly why this story remains suspended between allegation and proof. Meghan Markle officially just turned 45. Critics insist the scattered clues point elsewhere. Between old publications, family recollections, disputed online records, and amended paperwork, the internet keeps pulling the same thread, waiting to see whether it eventually snaps or finally reveals that there was never anything hidden underneath it at all.